Welcome to The Work Within, where we have conversations about mental health and faith to help you live with greater connection and wholeness in your everyday life. The Work Within is a podcast of the Watershed Initiative, supporting the mental health needs of the local church. Thanks for listening. Hi, welcome to The Work Within. I'm your host, John Lin, and I am joined by my lovely co-hosts, Laura Harrison and Paul McMullen. In today's episode, we're going to be exploring a question. Who is the real me? I don't think that's just a question that we ask ourselves in the angst-ridden years of our teenage years. It's not just a question we ask in midlife crisis. I think it's a question that kind of pops into our head every now and then, or maybe even on the daily. And if you've wondered that question, that's something we're going to explore today. I'm really excited about this conversation because the things that we're going to explore and learn about and discuss, they've been extremely paradigm shifting for me. They have been so helpful. But it took me honestly a while to understand it. At first, when I heard about some of this stuff, I was like, it sounds weird. I know I didn't totally get it. But as I've explored it more and applied it to my own life, it's been very helpful. I wanted to share an example of how I've come to see this conversation. You may or may not like basketball. I still like to play every now and then. I'm nursing an injury, so it's been a while. But several months ago, I was playing in an open gym, and it had been after a long hiatus. I stepped onto the court, and I just want to say I can't see any of your faces. So if you don't care about basketball, that's not the point. This is not about basketball, okay? This is about the internal dynamics that showed up for me on that day. So I go to play basketball, and I'm warming up and stuff like that. Then I show up on the court, and all of a sudden, I feel really small. And it's not because the other players were particularly big or athletic or intimidating. I just felt all of a sudden kind of insecure. And throughout the open gym, I played really crappy. Like I played very tentative. I wasn't assertive. I would pass up shots. People would pass to me and say, shoot. And I'd be like, oh, I'd just give it up. Or when I would complete airball it. Okay. And afterwards, I was like, man, that sucked. That did not feel good. And I noticed that, this part of me that was showing up, this tentative kind of scared part. And afterwards, I sort of thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to forget this. I'm too old to be playing. I'm going to hang up my shoes. Now, granted, a lot of guys my age, a lot of my friends have been hanging up their shoes. They don't want to get, the ruptured Achilles or whatever it might be. But for me, that was just an excuse. It was really because I didn't like the feeling. I didn't like seeing myself show up that way. Now, thankfully, I had been learning about some of the things we're going to be talking about. I had been learning about IFS, which I think you guys are going to share a little bit more about. And I realized that this was actually a part. There was a part of me that was getting activated. When I trace it back, it goes all the way back to when I was a kid. I was once playing basketball during recess, and I got made fun of, bullied, and I felt extremely small in that moment. And what was happening is even though this situation was very different, there was no immediate threats or anything like that, it triggered some of that feeling. And so even though I like to play it, and I could actually play a lot better than that day I played, that's maybe my true part, I let this other part show up. And so being aware of that was critical because I was actually able to recognize that. Actually, so that's not the real part of me that has to show up. I can show up and just have fun and enjoy it and play to my ability, which has degraded. It has degraded over time. But so I actually decided, you know what, I'm going to give it another try. And so I showed up again the following week, and my stat line was a lot better. Like I played a lot better. I didn't play perfectly. I made some mistakes, but I was able to have grace with myself and just have a good time. So that's I wanted to tee off that example because it shows, at least for me, it was a kind of a awakening to, their same situation, but different parts at play. And who's the real John? The one that can just play in a relaxed way and have fun, or that's scared and tentative and not willing to take a shot or take a risk there on the court? So I wanted to ask you guys, like basketball or no basketball, I'm sure there's a variety of different situations that you've seen. Is this a common experience? And from a mental health perspective, how would you interpret this?
First, John, basketball's great. People need to be into basketball.
Okay, yeah.
And no, it's interesting. I've coached one of my kids for multiple years in basketball, and there's a part of me that shows up as a coach, and then also a very insecure part of me that shows up. So I'm relating to your analogy or to your story. I think a lot of us do feel, and a lot of the people I work with, even the reason they're coming to do some work in therapy is because there's something incongruent between how they perceive themselves or how they should be, and then what's actually happening in their life. The ways that they're showing up in different situations, whether it's in their marriage or in parenting, or as they try to build a life and a career or build relationships, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Why am I struggling with this?" or "Why am I acting this way?" And I think that really bothers us. It creates a lot of anxiety. It can create depression. And so I think that's a good question. Why, if I if I should be or I think I am this sort of way, why do I show up in a different way in these settings? So it is something that I think we wrestle with.
Yeah. And I don't play basketball. I like watching basketball. But when we talk about like what was going on in your head, which I think is really important, like you said, well, there's a part of me that felt small. Well, then there was the part of you that said, well, you should just quit basketball.
Yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
so
that's
that's a
right.
whole different thing. So there's all of these parts and they're all designed to protect the self. So you kind of teased up a little bit about like internal family systems. And let me clarify a little bit about what that is. So internal family systems is a type of therapy and a theory in psychology that wants to view the internal world as a family of parts that are designed to protect the self, but also can oftentimes be in conflict with each other. But the true self is who we are at our core and the part that lives kind of behind everything and is observing what's going on. And there's really nothing wrong with the true self. The true self is like who you are at your core, your identity. From a Christian perspective, you could say it is your soul, the part of you that's connected to God, connected to the Holy Spirit. But even if you don't look at it through a Christian lens, it's helpful to think of like there are things that happen within your head that aren't necessarily you. They're adaptive things that you've created over time to respond to things that have happened to yourself as you've gone through life. So, for example, you could have a protect yourself part that keeps you safe. It's possible something happened in your life that made you feel like safety was a really high value. So then this is going to like really activate whenever you feel like you're in danger in some way. Or maybe you have a part of you that your parents were really good about taking you on adventures and fun. And so there's a part of you that craves that. Um, but they can get in conflict with it because your adventure part and your safe part may not always see the same way.
Mm,
And so they can get in conflict with each other. And sometimes they can really overreact and become a bully or become rebellious. Kind of like, for example, your small part was kind of bullying you a little bit, saying, "Oh, you're not really as good. You're not doing as great. Gosh, you should have made that shot. Why did you
yeah,
give that away?" Right? And that kind of internal bully dialogue is interesting to notice because we want to go, well, most people just agree with it. Yeah, I suck, right? But the real goal of IFS is to kind of help us like listen to those parts and be compassionate with those parts, understand why we feel that way in that circumstance and what is the origin story to that, so that you can start to like care for those parts and calm them down and help them see that, you now as the capable adult that you are can handle this. Whereas a kid, you didn't have power to change your situation. If you were getting bullied on the court as a kid, times they always said, "Go tell the teacher." Well, that doesn't usually work. So in those situations, you created a narrative for yourself and a part that would help keep you protected. And it just showed up again.
that's right. I want to keep, I want to explore this more with y'all because I imagine for some of our listeners, they've never heard of internal family systems and they're like, parts, like what does that even mean? So let's
Yeah.
let's let's tease that out a little more. And I think examples will be really helpful. Like for sure, like we can all, we can probably all point to an experience where like, oh yeah, a part of me would like to do X, but then another part of me wants to do Y. Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about something deeper than that?
One thing to say, it's not talking about multiple personality disorder. We're not saying
Yeah.
that each of us
You often get
has
that question.
10 different personalities, and one of, we're just, which one is going to show up today? Part of what Laura was saying is that the idea that there are parts of us that show up is that these are things that have developed over the course of our lifetime to help us navigate certain moments. There are two big kind of categories besides this sensation of who are we really, this self. There are protector parts, like Laura was mentioning, that show up in ways to help us get through situations. It's when we don't feel safe. There's two categories in IFS for that. There's managers that, as the name states, it's kind of helping us figure out how do we show up in a way that we should in our environment. So these are the parts that try to make us look good. And they're also usually the parts that get on to us when we don't look good.
So like
And
the inner
so-
critic, for example, would that be?
Yeah. Inner critic
Example.
is your main manager. You might think of that way.
Yeah.
But even from a Christian perspective, there could be a manager part that's saying, this is how I should be behaving. And it doesn't have, and to know whether this is your yourself or your spirit form self or a manager part of what you might want to think about is the expression of this mostly through guilt and shame, through trying to make sure I look a certain way in response to how others or even how I perceive myself. So is it managing how I'm living, or is it more of a freedom? Is it more of an internal response that's based on love and just knowing who I am? And so if it's showing up that way, it's a manager. So there's the inner critic, there's the Christian manager, and then there's another category of protectors called firefighters. And those are the parts of us that say we're in a bad situation and we need to get out of it right now. And so this might be a part of us that for some people, we learned usually by watching one of our caretakers that if we can get big and get angry and get loud, sometimes other people will back away or back down and we'll be safe again. And so we might respond in a situation that it feels very uncharacteristic of us, but all of a sudden we got loud and we're like, and later on we're thinking, oh, why did I do that? Why did I yell, at my family? And we're thinking about that. And it's a part of us that's shown up on the scene that felt threatened in some way, usually. And so it shows up and then it puts out the fire. Whatever the fire is the threat that we're perceiving. And so it puts out the fire. It's also the addictions, the things that we struggle with that we keep doing to numb ourselves. Those are usually the firefighter parts that are protecting us from feeling overwhelmed by saying, this is too much. I need to go take a couple drinks. I need this, I need that. I need my phone. Yeah, our parts now can be, a firefighter can be, I'm already scrolling on my phone without thinking about it. There are pathways in our mind, neural pathways that are connected to different responses. We don't have to think about it. It's implicit responses. And think about my protectors are, from a neurophysical sort of standpoint, these are responses that have developed in my brain to help protect me. I don't have to think about it. I just show up that way. And that's why it happens so quickly. I'm trying to decide, am I going to be an angry dad tonight? It shows up when I feel threatened, like I'm feeling disrespected and maybe I'm an angry dad. I'm not thinking about, am I going to pull into the Andes frozen custard on the way home? I'm just like, man, I really need an Andes. If I think about that a little bit more, it's like, where did that thought come from? Oh, I've been overwhelmed today. And that is a comforting thing. So those are maybe a funny way of thinking about protectors, but firefighters and managers. And Laura, how would you describe the other part, the exiles?
Yeah, I mean, I think Exiles is like the origin stories. And I'll give an example of when I was little. And I remember being about 3 years old, and I don't remember exact context of what was happening, but for some reason, we had a watermelon. We were going to eat the watermelon. And in my mind, I pick up the watermelon to take it to a responsible adult to cut it up. But instead of like being successful at 3 years old, I drop the watermelon and break it all over the place. And the response I get back from my dad was a huge, very loud, emotional response. Now, if you'll ask my sister about this same event, is she remembers it differently, that she was the one carrying the watermelon and I was just next to her when this happened. but you can see how you blend those things together and it becomes one memory. So if you look at that as my origin story, I created in my behaviors going forward that perfection means acceptance. Perfection keeps you out of trouble. If you don't make a mistake, then nobody gets upset and nobody yells. So then my manager part became big and strong and was like, hey, we've got to do everything perfectly. So I was a really good student. I was always trying to do the right thing. And then you fail and you fail and you fail because you can't always do the right thing. So then you get a firefighter part that says, I'm out. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to try and be perfect anymore. So enter the rebellious teenage years and you just start doing everything the opposite way. And so you can see how those two play against each other because the perfection part didn't go away. I always felt like I was not doing enough and still have to struggle with that now. And there's always that firefighter part saying, yeah, you can't ever do it. So let's just go all the way this way. Right. And so that's the thing that you have to struggle with. And that's the internal conflict. Now, what is actually true about me? What is true about me lies behind all of that. That these things were just created to deal with a stressful situation. And so if you step back from it and you say, okay, so what did that little girl need? What did she need in that moment? Regardless of whether she was carrying the watermelon or not. She needed somebody to go, oh, it's okay. You're all right. It was just a mistake, right? And if you can look past, like my dad brings to that situation all of his trauma from his past. I bring to situations now with my kids the trauma from my past. And if you can look at it in a compassionate way and talk to that little child and say, hey, Laura, you're okay. You didn't mean to make a mistake. It was just an accident. I have to do that with being late a lot. I have to talk myself out of beating myself up about being late. But that is the third part that exists behind the firefighter and the managers is this exile. And usually it's a small child. It could be a teenager that was left behind or abandoned. And you're looking for how can I now show up as a functional adult and care for that exile part so that my managers and my firefighters don't have to work as hard.
Yeah. So for those who are trying to integrate this and understand the framework, what you're saying is all of us, we have wounds from our past, these origin stories, things that happen to us that, we carry within us. And some of them may be really significant, huge, and some of them may be smaller on the scheme of things, but they still hurt us and wound us. And from those experiences, we've developed different ways of showing up, of dealing with those things, different, coping mechanisms. And some of those can actually be things that are rewarded by society, like a perfectionist or working really hard or seeking approval. And so we're good at navigating those things. And other things can, maybe show up and it's getting angry or it's coping with certain pain through addiction. But all of these parts are meant to help us navigate the world. And part of the work then is learning to recognize what parts are at play and believing that if we can attend to them, our true self can emerge.
So some people might listen to this and say, so is every part of me, is it based on a wound? And I don't want people to have the wrong idea that it's just from some traumatic moment that happened in your life. It could be we just get the idea as we grow up that certain behaviors are rewarded. We don't necessarily experience some sort of painful moment around that, but maybe we just have this kind of underlying anxiety of, if I'm not this, that's bad. And so I am going to be this. I am going to perform at this level. And so if you have that message enough times, you start to respond to it. You have a part of you develop in response to that. And it probably has something to do with the culture of your family and what your family felt like. And so that always has a lot of good things to investigate when we study our family of origin.
I always tell my clients, and true of my parents too, they were doing the best they could. Most parents, there are exceptions to this, but most parents were doing the best they could with the tools that they had at the time and the education and the resources they had at the time. Most parents. But they all parents make mistakes. And so it's okay to go back and critically look at like, what did my family of origin look like? Not to like blame moms or blame dads, but to understand how their imperfection in raising you impacted the way you're now interacting with other people and interacting with yourself.
I wanted for us to talk a little bit about some of that inner conflict, because we all have different parts that have formed and show up in our adult life. And my guess is, I mean, just because I look at my own parts, and there are some parts I'm like, oh, I like that part, that part has served me well. And other parts I'm like, oh, I don't like you so much. And other parts I'm like, I despise you. I wish you weren't there, and I want to keep hidden. And so there's a range of emotions I have to those different parts. And it makes me think of Romans chapter 7, 15 to 25. Paul writes his own internal conflict. And he writes, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate to do, that is what I do. And he goes on, and it kind of starts to sound like a Dr. Seuss rhyme. But then he says in verse 24, what a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. Now, what I appreciate about that passage is just how honest it is about that struggle. Like, that's not who I want to be. And yet that part, whether it's the perfectionist, whether it's the inner critic, whether it's the addict or the angry person or whatever it looks like, keeps showing up. Dang it. Like I'm trying harder to get that under wraps and to live in a different way, the way I believe I should or need to, but I don't seem to be able to. And then what I've often found is when that happens, I get more frustrated with myself. And there's a part of me that's like, John, what's wrong with you? You've been a Christian for so many years. How come you're still struggling with that? So yeah, what do you guys think about that internal struggle, and what new pathway does maybe IFS offer that can get us out of that shame cycle?
Yeah, I think that that's one of my favorite verses, by the way. It's always been like
Really?
one of my foundational verses, because
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna mess it up. And then always trying to fight that perfectionist side. But I think that when you look at how your true self is rooted, it's rooted, and this is one of the foundations of ISF as well, is like to look at it, try to look at everything through these 8C lenses, which is curiosity, calm, confidence, compassion, creativity, clarity, courage, and connectedness. Now, for me, the biggest one for me is always starts with curiosity, right? Because we can't start making change until we build awareness. And so being able to like fall backwards and go, what actually just happened there? And instead of approaching yourself with accusation, which isn't part of your true self, and even aligning with godly principles, that God doesn't approach you with accusation either, right? But if you take that position of curiosity and say, okay, what's actually happening here? And let me softly look at this. Where how can I adjust this? And what are the parts of me that are coming into play? That's where you start to like get everybody aligned and feel loved inside of yourself, right? Because that part of you that wants to, perform a certain way and be seen a certain way by your peers could be in conflict with the part of you that feels like you're incompetent, right? That you're not good enough to perform that way. And so noticing both of those, like this one really wants this and this one really wants that. And so what's actually going on with those parts? Paul, what would you add to that?
I think in that passage in Romans, he ends on a hopeful note. What a wretched person I am. Because it is wretched to feel like you're just bouncing back and forth between who you want to be and who you're not.
Yeah.
And then you've got this judgment part of you that's just highlighting how you're not living up to the standard. And that's miserable. And I think a lot of people, I mean, maybe that's why a lot of people think about churchgoers or Christians as not fun. It seems more miserable because you're trying to attain a standard and then you're failing at that and you're going back and forth between that. And I think that he ends on, what a wretched man am I, who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God, Christ Jesus, my Lord. And then we go into Romans 8, but that description of the human condition is kind of sandwiched in between. If you go back and read Romans 6, 7, and 8, and he's not saying we're stuck in that spot. We're not stuck in that back and forth condemnation internally. He's saying that God has given us a way out of that mental state. And like you were saying, Laura, I think there's a way to access the spirit of Christ inside of us and approach ourselves with earlier as we were talking before I said session. This is not a counseling session. It's a podcast episode. You can see where my mind is.
Yeah.
It could be a session, but I was thinking about John 1, where it says that when Jesus came, he came full of grace and truth. So if you think about if Jesus inhabits us as believers, we can, and if we can tap into the way he perceives us, it's full of grace and truth. It's a gentle, curious approach to what's happening within us. And it's not an anything goes. It's like, no, let me be with the parts of me that feel scared. Let me be with those parts, help understand what's going on, and then help kind of reframe and say like, no, it's going to be okay. No, that's not the only picture of yourself. No, that's not the only way forward. And if you think about a parent and a young child, and the way a parent that's feeling calm and connected with themselves could speak to a young child when they've made a mistake. So we take your story, Laura, and if you can even tap back into what does it feel like to have a parent come alongside you and say, "Hey, it's okay. I love you." That's not, and maybe the child is condemning themselves. I messed up. I messed up the watermelon for everybody. This is terrible. I'm the worst kid ever. And instead you hear this, no, you're not. I love you. This doesn't change the way I feel about you at all. Who you are is my child, and you're unique and you're special, and you can do all sorts of things well, and we'll learn how to carry watermelons one day, and it's going to be okay, and we're going to learn how to play basketball well, and all these things. You just think about, what is a good parent? What would they say to their child? And if you think about inhabiting that spirit towards your parts that feel scared or feel frustrated or feel ashamed, then that's just a whole different ballgame. And so I've got a book, and I know you've got some book references later on, John, but there's a book by Andy Kolber called Try Softer. And it's about, a lot of times when we have that condemning voice, we're like, I got to try harder, got to do better, got to do better. And what if, we try this softer approach of like a good patient parent to those parts of ourselves, and speak gently to ourselves and be curious and compassionate. And I think the fruit of that can be so good. It's such a different experience than the condemning back and forth and firefighters numbing out and then feeling bad about that, and coming up alongside those parts of us and kind of being gentle. There's a picture of inviting that part of you to come up to your front porch and kind of sit for a while and just be with that part of you. I've always liked that. Just this welcoming approach of, hey, that angry part of me, let's sit down for a second and just figure out, let's talk about what's going on. Why, tell me the why, tell me the feelings. Let's explore that a little bit. What are you protecting? I find that's a really good question for people trying to understand what's going on inside them, to say, what does that part of you feel like it's protecting? And that can be a really good, curious question to explore.
Yeah, that's a great curiosity question, because I think all behaviors are designed to protect the self in some way or another. I mean, even, you get up and you go to work. Why? Because you wouldn't go to work if you didn't have to. You have to so that you can provide for your family and you can do all the things, right? And then the part that doesn't go to work because I'm afraid of failure, protecting the self. And so if you always look at a behavior as, how is this protecting me? That can help you to understand the underlying motive for doing that. Like even people who are doing self-destructive behaviors, they're doing it to protect them. Like Paul said, that big anger, that's to push people away because you feel unsafe.
Yeah. I'm really glad y'all have touched upon this posture of curiosity and kindness to those parts of ourselves that maybe we dislike or we want to change, but we've been stuck in. And it makes me think about how Paul writes that it's the kindness of God. It's not his wrath. It's not his accusation or judgment. It's the kindness of the Lord that leads us to repentance. I love that. I feel like we need to talk about that more because, at least in my own experience, that's not how most of us experience the grace of God. We have a really difficult time receiving the kindness of God. And so if you need to look that up, it's Romans 2:4. It's the kindness of God that is intended to lead us to repentance. But that has been something that has really blown me away by this model. I was sharing with you guys earlier that for the longest time, I've been taught that God loves me and, he died on my behalf and all these things. And yet at an experiential level, it's been very difficult to receive that, especially when I fail or when I don't live up to the standards I think God calls of me. I can feel really bad about myself, and not just like a healthy guilt, but shame, right? Like I feel worthless or I feel inadequate. And so even though I have this stated belief, my experience is so different. And I think what IFS has kind of opened the door to for me is to allow me to actually operationalize some of these truths. And so it's pretty amazing. I was blown away when I read this in Dr. Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts. He wrote that, and I'm not even sure what his faith background is, but he did say this: through a Christian lens, through IFS, people wind up doing in the inner world what Jesus did in the outer. They go to inner exiles and enemies with love, heal them, and bring them home, just as he did with the lepers, the poor, and the outcast. I love that, right? That's such a powerful image, like, because we see Jesus showing radical love and acceptance to people that were just written off. And if we can do that for the parts of ourselves that we write off, that we're ashamed of, or that have hurt ourselves or hurt others, or that are unproductive or destructive or, causing, damage, rather than being like, again, condemning and accusing those things, saying, you know what? I see you. I see what's happening, and I love you. Not that I condone your behavior, right? Not that it's okay, right? And that's the grace and truth, I think, Paul, you were alluding to. But that, just like a parent to a child, a good
Yeah.
parent to a child, I want to walk with you through this. And so, what happens as you guys have worked with people, maybe in your own life? What happens when people are able to extend kindness to those parts of themselves that are burdened or incongruent with the kind of lives they want to lead?
Mm. They just get a lot happier for Yeah, I mean, I think there's like what I tell people all the time. A lot of times, I work with a lot of moms, and so what moms tend to do is extend outside of themselves and manage everybody else too, right? And so when we start working on pulling that back and understanding why they need to control the other people around them that they're close to, or why they need to like put so much of themselves out. And I tell them all the time, I said, there's so much freedom and release and joy for you when you let this stuff go. Because when you let it go and you don't take it as seriously and you start to calm those parts down and help them feel safe, that I can trust them to handle it. I don't have to be right there. I don't have to make sure it happened. It's okay if it doesn't happen because they will learn something from it, right? Then you start to feel like, oh, okay, look at all this time I had. Look at how much nicer I am. Look at how much my relationship with my children has improved because I'm not like all up in their chili all the time, right? Because my manager part is overreacting. And so that makes so much better for yourself internally. And then you're able to show up so much better for other people. When you kind of confine yourself to yourself and understand yourself first. I don't I think a lot of times the manager parts are trying to control other people. Not always, but when they're trying to control other people and you start to let that go, your relationships improve.
Yeah, I would add that you feel comfort very quickly because that presence with yourself is comforting. And those are sometimes there are parts of us, it's almost like they're asking for attention. They're looking for some attention and to receive attention, especially if it's an exiled part, like a something that's been with us a long time but feels small, and we're able to give that attention. Oh, just the attention, just the eyes on that part of us. It feels like, yeah, there's a comfort and there's a sense of like welcoming home. And even if you get into the IFS language, there's kind of this homecoming or this kind of bringing together or integration. And I think that feels really special. It's like I can welcome this part of me. It doesn't have to be away. It doesn't have to be shamed. It can be welcomed back. And that feels it feels like I'm becoming whole. It feels like I'm feeling more free. But the other thing that you said, Laura, too, is, and I imagine some people listening to this, um, if it's a new concept, we don't self-perceive as having these different I mean, it's not natural to take that inward look, at least in our culture, and say like, "Oh yeah, this is where how I'm operating." And so it might feel like I could feel some defensiveness rising and like, no, this is just who I am. My rough exterior, that's who I am. And many of us have developed rough exteriors and thick skin to be able to make it through life. And it feels kind of like who we are. But I would just invite you, if you're listening to this, to consider again, I've developed that to be able to do what? To be able to make it through life, to protect myself. And again, what is that rough exterior protecting? And is there another part of me that's inside that doesn't get to see the light of day because I've always got to have that thick skin on? And so just to be curious with yourself and wonder what else there could be, because there could be this wealth and richness of experience that you haven't gotten to taste of for a long time if you are always living in that protective, gotta keep my guard up self. And so just to invite you to say there could be more to your experience of life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think becoming aware of your internal dialogue is one of the most important things you can do because a lot of times people don't realize they have it. And listen to how you talk to yourself. And if you're talking to yourself like you wouldn't let anyone else talk to your best friend
Yeah.
or your husband or your wife, then that's really important to notice. And that tells you a lot about what your parts are doing, right? So be aware of that.
Hmm. I imagine if you're listening to all this and your curiosity is piqued about IFS, you want to learn more about that, we'll put some resources in the show notes. Dr. Schwartz, No Bad Parts, he's kind of the founder of this modality, as well as Jenna Ramirzma writes a book, Altogether You, written from a Christian perspective. And so those, I think, Paul, you alluded to, Try Softer, that book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
by Andy Kolber,
Yeah.
Kolber.
So those are some starting points. But I think as we wrap up this conversation, there's so much more we can dive into, and I hope we do in the future. I think what I just personally, as like a matter of personal conviction, what I hope for our listeners, if those of us listening and those of us who are engaging in this work could learn how to show more kindness to ourselves, to the parts of ourselves that we know needs to grow, that God is still at work in, but rather than shaming it or shooting it or getting angry or frustrated with ourselves, learning to show kindness, I really believe that is the starting point of the kind of transformation that awaits all of us. And that unlocks the ability for us to have the kind of wholeness and connection we all desire in our own lives and our relationships. And I'm thinking about the churches we're a part of, the communities and workplaces that we're a part of. What a beautiful image that Jesus gives us of how he loved everyone, even the enemies. And we are called to do the same to the enemies within. So I hope we can take that journey together. And we appreciate you joining us today, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to The Work Within. We hope this show blessed you in some way. Please subscribe and leave us a review. Your support means a lot to us. Finally, if you're looking for a therapist, we'd love to help. Visit us at www.watershedinitiative.com to get started. For a limited time, new clients can receive 10% off their first 5 sessions of therapy by mentioning The Work Within. Join us again next time.